Hi, everybody. Let's talk about the music theory basics. Let me share my screen here real quick. Look at some of the notes here. The music theory basics. Let's look at the notes on the keyboard. They repeat over a 12-note sequence. The black notes have two names, either sharp, taken from the white note on the left, or flat, taken from the white note on the right. The numerical unit of notes is called a tone. The move of one note to the next is called a semitone. For example, C to D flat or C to C sharp is a semitone. E to F is a semitone. You see there's no black note in the middle there. And the move from one note to the second is a tone. C to D, for example, and you see there's a black note in the middle of that. So that would be also considered a whole step. Or G to A, also considered a tone or a whole step. E to G flat, E to G flat is a tone or a whole step, of course, having F in the middle as the semitone. And tones are used to identify scales of what we'll get into a little bit later in the semester. The notes used in a sequencer correspond to notes in a staff. Each grid in the sequence below represents 1/16th of a bar or 16 semiquavers. Each note is a quaver or a 1/8 bar. And so we're used to seeing this, of course, when we look at logic, and that's what we've got here. So just to review, hitting Control, create empty region, we can easily see this. And if we wanted to, we could input any of those regions in, couldn't we? And so that's going to be one of the things that we'll be doing on some of the exercises that we'll be creating here this week. We're going to be creating chords. Now with that, as you can see, I just inputted those chords with an empty region. But with that said, that is still notation. Remember, if I click to the score, I can actually see how that is written in notation. Nothing to it. Now, continuing on here, for those that have never read music before, of course, I was no different. And it's very, very easy. There's nothing to it. And so you wanted to look at exactly how this is set up. Looking at C and the way we look at C within our computer setup, within our MIDI setup, it's exactly the same setting as hitting to C1 in this particular case. As you could see in this case, this would also be 2 middle C and corresponding all the way up to your diatonic C scale. There's nothing to it. So we want to talk about the piano fingering because we're going to be getting into not necessarily inputting chords like what I've just done here, but maybe potentially the next level for some of us would be to play them in. And it's really not that hard to do. So before we get started, I just want to talk about our hand positionings. And so as you can see here, our thumbs, 1, 2, middle finger 3, 4, and pinky 5. And that corresponds to each individual hand. But in this exercise, and especially in the beginnings, we just want to look at one hand, and that's going to be our right hand, of course. So let's get into how we can build chords. Chords and intervals. What's an interval? The distance between two notes is called an interval. The smallest interval in Western music, the interval between two adjacent notes, is a semitone or half step. We just covered that, of course, right? So 2 semitones make a tone or a whole step. An interval can also be expressed in terms of 2 properties: a quality, which is perfect, major, minor, and a number, unison, second, third, fourth. Perfect intervals are so called because they're considered perfectly constant. They sound pleasing to the ear, pleasant to the ear. So that's what these will look like. And I think it's very important for us to have this. And of course, these notes will also be located on canvas. Your minor second, of course, 1 semitone, major second, 2 semitones. It's all review for you. But so that you can see this, and when we build a chord, we're really looking at our root, we're looking at our third minor or major, and we're looking at our fifth. So diatonic triads in the key of C, all white notes. Let's try to play each chord in the tempo of our choice. And so with that, we don't necessarily have to hit a tempo yet. What I like to do is just look here. So I'll just bring you into the studio here. Let's look at what we've got. So in this case, I'm just looking at being able to play each chord as we start. And so as you can see on our sheet, when we started looking at what the names of each individual note is. And as you look on the piano, it repeats. It keeps going all the way up. It's just basically 12 and it just keeps rolling all the way through. And so what we're going to be worried about in this particular case are all white notes, only white notes. So let's start on C, which is the groupings of 2 right to the left, 1 semitone down to the left. You're looking at a C major. So in this case, if I was just to play C, and then if I'm going to open up all white notes and just skip the D, I'm going to be playing our major third. And then as I keep going, skipping all the way up, basically looking at it from white note standpoints, I'm just skipping each note. You see there? So that's going to be our C major. Now, if I take that same positioning, I can move that positioning all the way up the scale. I'm just simply moving at one note, doing exactly the same thing. Starting on 1, hitting the 3rd basically by skipping, hitting the 5th basically by skipping all white notes, and continue all the way up. It's really that easy. So one of the things we want to look at then is fingering. And so as you can see here, we want to use our fingers, our thumb, and in this case, on this exercise, we want to use our 3rd finger, and we want to use our 5th finger very specifically. And let's start on C. So we can just pick the tempo that we want. So we'll just get started where we roll. Of course, most importantly, we could go back to Logic and we could get a tempo or a metronomic, beat rolling. Here in this case, let's just do that. Let's get something in tempo. And you can hear that's pretty fast. But if I wanted to, then I could just take this. I could just play to that root, 3rd. And with that metronomic pulse, I can just keep rolling all the way through, right? Move up one note, keeping up the scale, one note, very simply, the same pattern. It's really that easy. So something that I would practice again, and that's in your notes on Canvas. You can see this here, that pattern in itself. Just simply, rolling through that with 1, 3, and 5, nothing to it. Starting up the scale and then just keep going all the way up. There's an enormous amount of music that you can make from that point, but just for practice, of course. The next thing that we want to talk about is playing each chord in a different inversion. And so I've got some fingering positionings for you and just, some ideas and some examples that you could see here. So in the case of the example, and you're going to see this on Canvas as well, is we're looking at the first chord starting in root position, but there are multiple ways that we can play that chord. So think about this then. If I start in root position on 1, 3, and 5, then I want to basically play that same chord in a different way. I'm going to now start on the 3rd. So in this case, starting on the 3rd, the suggestion would be use your 2nd finger. So starting on the 3rd would be E. Using my 2nd finger to get to the 5th, which is going to be G, right? And then opening that up to the 5th. That's still a C. It's still a C major, but at the same token, it's a different inversion. That's going to be what we call 1st inversion. So let's do the same thing again and move up, and let's start on the 5th. And as you can see here, we give you a little help. Starting on the root, which is 1. We'll start on the 3rd, which is 3. And we'll go to the 5th. And now, having the 5th being G, having the 3rd finger now being the root, and having our 5th finger being the 3rd, that's our 2nd inversion. So if I was to roll through this pattern, I could then basically play root position in 1, 3, 5. I could play my 1st inversion, 1, 2, 5. I could play my 2nd inversion in 1, 3, 5 again. And I could play my root position up the octave in 1, 3, 5. So it might sound something like this. Right? Can come in very, very handy. And with that, when we start playing chord changes, that's going to be vital. So work through that. It should be a lot of fun. Very, very easy. There's nothing to it. The next one we want to talk about, triad exercises and techniques. Playing each triad and moving up and down each note, next to each triad, just like what we've practiced. But the difference is that we're going to use a different fingering. So in this case, we want to look at the fingering. Think of holding a baseball. When you hold a baseball, you see how you kind of hold it out. You kind of almost have a claw to it, right? So in this case then, I want to play this chord with the root. I want to play it with my index finger, my second finger, and I want to play it with the third finger. Exactly what we had done on the last exercise, only we're going to change the fingering. So let's just do that again. In this case, now I'm just opening it up, as you can see here. You should feel a little pull here. This is going to take a little bit of a strength. But as you practice, you're going to find that that's going to come through. So what's the difference? Just holding it out instead of using 1, 3, 5. We're going to use the triad, the same information, the same chords, but we're going to think about holding the bass ball in this particular case, opening it up. That's going to come in very handy because we're going to be playing a pattern a little bit later on, and we're going to be switching that pattern in between major and minor. You're going to find that that's going to be a magic trick. But before we get going, remember how we talked about these different inversions. Now I've got a very simple chord change, something that you can practice if you decide that you want to. But this chord change is going from C to A minor, to F, to G, to C, to A minor, to F, to G. Now the game in this particular pattern is going to be, we don't necessarily want to play them all in root position. Let me show you the difference. So if I was to play this particular pattern and I just go and switch all the way up from root position through each chord change, you're going to find it sounds like I'm jumping. Listen here. What could be the next level to this? Well, let's maybe start thinking about different inversions. And so what I'm going to do in this particular case then is I'm going to play the C, and let's think about all of the chord tones that are in A minor that are within C. And as you'll see then, I'm actually playing the third and the fifth of A minor already. So all I would need to do is just change the root and look at the difference and listen to the difference in this pattern, in this passage now that I've got a good chord change and a good inversion. The closest inversion that I could get to. And you're very used to hearing that, right? Versus this. It's a little bit too far away, isn't it? Same chord, but in this particular case, we're using A minor first inversion and starting with the root position C. Now, if I went to F, the chord tones that we could see in this particular case, then we would be able to maybe potentially play, in this case, I can see I've got the fifth of F, which is going to be the C. So then in order for me to be able to finish out the F in this case, then all I would have to do is just play F. Now, that's going to be second inversion because now I'm starting on the fifth, right? So in this particular case, let's just keep going on that passage again. C, root position. A, first inversion. F, second inversion. Now, what do we have for G here? Well, I see G, I'm missing a couple things here in the case of G. So in that sense, what I could probably do is just shift back. I could start looking at G where I would start on the third. In this case, the fifth, and then the root. And we're going to be very close in that case, but I really don't have any leading tones. I really don't have any tones that are corresponding to the last chord in this case. So I would just basically shift it down because that's the closest point. So as I play the game, essentially trying to basically create less movement as I was jumping around. Now I want to utilize the chord tones that we've studied within each triad, and now we can hopefully play it a little bit more musical. Let's try it. C in root position. A, first inversion. F, second inversion. F, first, or G, first inversion. C, root position. A minor, first inversion. F, second inversion. G, first inversion. Nice, right? Now, the chord pattern is the next one that we're talking about. So, and the last thing, of course, in this sense, because I find that this one is going to be a magic trick for many of you, and I like to end on this one because I think that it's, essentially one of the easiest things and one of the most powerful things that we can bring to you. Being able to go back and forth between major and minor is very, very easy. And one of the things I like to do is instill that within muscle memory. So in this case, we're looking at this chord pattern. Try to play this simple pattern with each chord, starting on the third and the fifth, and then we'll just pedal back to the root, right? So in this particular case, as you see here, this is how it's written, of course, but there's nothing to what I'm doing here as far as how it's written. I'm basically playing exactly the same triad, but I'm gonna pedal it now. I'm gonna start on the third and fifth, I'm gonna pedal it back. It's gonna sound something like this, and you've heard that before. We could do every chord that way. And I think you'll find it's really, really easy, very, very musical, and a great exercise. Now, the trick is this. What we want to do is take that same pulse, and if you start on any chord, if I'm on a major chord, and if I wanted to play a minor chord, in this particular case, I'm starting in C major, right? We know that because I have my root position, and then of course I'm going up 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones to get to that third, and in this case, to get to the minor third, we have to go 3 semitones. So if I was to play that same pulse exercise, and if I take my middle finger or my third here and just shift it down one note, I will now play the minor third. Listen. Shift down my third, 1 semitone. That's all it takes. So what I would suggest is practicing going back and forth between major and minor. You can do that in every single chord tone. And let me show you how that works. Shift it down, minor. Notice I don't change the fifth at all. The fifth never changes. So this strength is very, very important for us to get that going because we're really only shifting that finger. So let's move up one note. Now, the next note when we move up, if you notice here, this is D minor based on the fact that we have 3 semitones to create the minor third, right? Now, and of course, it sounds sad. If I wanted to make that major, instead of going down, we're gonna take the middle finger, we're gonna go up. Check it out. 1 semitone up. Don't change the fifth at all again. It never, ever changes. Cool, right? Okay, maybe one note, we'll try it again. E minor again. So we know it being minor, that third has to move up in order to be major. There we go. So 2 things in this exercise. I would practice this pattern in time and keep moving those notes. Just keep shifting, just like we were talking, all white notes. It's no different than the position that you've practiced. All we do is just have the third and fifth and just rock it back and forth. Nothing to it. Now, remember this. Do you need to read music in order to do this? Well, let me show you something here. I'm going to do exactly the same thing that we had done before. This time, though, let's just call it logic. So some of you would say, I don't read music. This might be a little difficult. And I'm going to tell you just the opposite. This is very, very easy. Do you see here, I've got my controller. I'm playing my controller now, essentially that little key lab that you guys saw. Right? So I'm going to play this little controller now. I'll play the same exercise. But what I've done is I've set it up with this metronome. So let me just play the metronome through and you'll see what I'm talking about. We'll leave it right there. But as you could see, I've populated all of that MIDI information without having to do what we've just talked about, having to draw it in and all of these things. We don't, of course you can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But how nice is it that we don't have to do that, maybe potentially playing it in. Can I read this? Well, hit the score editor, my friends, and you'll see that's exactly what I gave you on the sheet. There's nothing to this. With that said, have fun. We'll talk to you guys soon. Let me know if you need anything.